All right, everyone, so I gotta ask.
Yeah.
Did you see Iceni in our last deep dive? I mean, seriously,
Yeah.
talk about ripped.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. I'm telling you, if you haven't already hit that subscribe button, you gotta do it. Help this channel grow. Just like Iceni and, honestly, all of us with the information he keeps sending our way.
For sure.
Speaking of which, get this, studies show, our brains are now about 0.5% plastic by weight.
Wow.
Plastic. In our brains.
It's wild, isn't it?
And guess what? That number's only going up.
It's true.
Yeah.
And it's not some far-off dystopian future either. This is happening right now.
Yeah.
We're talking about microplastics, these tiny particles that are finding their way into our bodies and specifically making themselves at home in our brains.
Okay, so that's pretty disturbing.
Yeah.
The more we learn about this, the more unsettling it gets.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the big question for this deep dive. How do we get this stuff out?
Exactly.
Today, we're going to unpack the science behind microplastic removal and explore some practical steps you can take to address this issue head on.
So to start, we need to understand how these microplastics are even getting into the brain.
Okay.
And research suggests two main pathways.
Yeah.
First, there are nanoplastics, which are even tinier than microplastics.
Right.
These particles are small enough to cross the blood-brain barrier, which is supposed to act as a fortress protecting our brains from harmful substances.
Hold on. The blood-brain barrier. I thought that was like an impenetrable shield for our brains.
Yeah.
How are these nanoplastics getting through?
You're right. It's incredibly selective about what it allows to pass through. Think of it like a bouncer at an exclusive club.
I like that.
But these nanoplastics, due to their minuscule size, are slipping past security, bypassing the brain's natural defenses.
Sneaky little things.
And the second way microplastics are entering the brain is through our noses.
Really?
Specifically the olfactory bulb, which is the area responsible for our sense of smell.
So we're literally breathing in plastic.
Unfortunately, it seems that way.
That's
Yeah.
alarming.
It is a cause for concern. And what makes it even more challenging is that our bodies don't have a natural way to excrete microplastics.
Oh, no.
They build up over time, accumulating not only in the brain, but also in our lungs, blood, bone marrow, even our skin and gut.
Okay, so let's break this down. If our bodies can't eliminate microplastics naturally, what options do we have? The research mentions plasma donation and exchange as being particularly effective methods. Why is that?
Well, plasma, the liquid part of our blood, is where these microplastics tend to hang out. They're more likely to be found there than in our red blood cells.
Okay.
So when you donate plasma, you're essentially filtering out a greater concentration of microplastics compared to traditional blood donation.
So it's not just about getting rid of the bad stuff in our blood, it's specifically targeting these microplastics.
Exactly. And for those who might need a more powerful approach, there's plasma exchange.
Okay.
It's a medical procedure where they separate your plasma from your blood cells, filter out the harmful substances, including microplastics, and then return the clean blood back to your body.
So that sounds pretty intense. Who would typically need something like that?
It is a medical procedure, so it's not for everyone.
Right.
It's often used for people with specific health conditions where filtering the blood is necessary.
Makes sense.
Interestingly, some longevity clinics are also starting to utilize this method as part of their treatment plans.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
The research also mentions some other potential removal methods like EBO, UBI, and even sweating. Can you tell us more about those?
Of course. Research on these methods is still in its early stages, and it's important to note that they're not currently considered as effective as plasma donation for removing microplastics from the blood.
Yeah.
But they are areas of active exploration. One method is EBO, which stands for extracorporeal blood oxygenation and ozonation.
Wow.
This process involves exposing the blood to ozone and UV light with the goal of eliminating harmful substances potentially, including those pesky microplastics.
So it's like giving our blood a deep clean.
Exactly. Then there's UBI, or ultraviolet blood irradiation, which is essentially a UV light 5E. This method has historical roots, having been used back in the 40s and 50s to treat various medical conditions. Now there's renewed interest in its potential applications, with some longevity clinics revisiting this approach.
Wait, a UV light. How did that work to remove microplastics?
UV light has the ability to break down microplastics, degrading them into smaller, less harmful components. Imagine it like using a powerful light to dismantle these plastic particles. The challenge lies in figuring out how to safely and effectively apply this technology within the human body.
Okay, so the jury's still out on that one. What about sweating? We all know good sweat can feel detoxifying, but can it actually help with microplastic removal?
There's emerging research suggesting that sweating might play a role in excreting toxins, including BPA, which is a common chemical used to make certain types of plastics, but it's not yet clear how significant a role sweating plays in eliminating microplastics specifically.
So sauna enthusiasts might be onto something, but maybe don't rely on sweat alone to combat microplastics.
That's right. It's probably best not to consider sweating your primary strategy in this battle.
Yeah. Right, makes sense. There's also mention of something called the glymphatic system. It sounds like it's straight out of a sci-fi movie.
It does have a futuristic ring to it.
Yeah.
The glymphatic system is essentially the brain's dedicated cleaning crew. It's responsible for clearing out waste products, including toxins and proteins, keeping the brain's environment pristine. And here's the key. It's most active while we're sleeping, particularly during deep sleep.
So getting enough sleep isn't just good for our energy levels and mood, it's also crucial for keeping our brains clean.
Literally. Precisely. And here's where things get even more intriguing. Melatonin, the hormone that regulates our sleep-wake cycles, also appears to play a role in lymphatic function. Some studies suggest it might even contribute to breaking down BPA.
Wow, melatonin is a multitasker.
It seems so. Although we need further research to confirm its specific role in microplastic removal.
So sleep, melatonin, potentially sweating. These are all ways we can help our bodies naturally deal with microplastics.
Exactly. And there's one more avenue worth mentioning, though it's still very much in the realm of speculation: hyperbaric oxygen therapy, or HBOT.
HBOT, isn't that something athletes use for injury recovery?
Yes, it's used for a variety of purposes, and researchers are investigating its potential for a wide range of applications. There's no direct evidence yet that HBOT can help with microplastics, but the high levels of oxygen involved in the therapy could theoretically contribute to their degradation.
Fascinating. But let's face it, even with all these potential removal methods, we're still living in a world saturated with microplastics. They're in our air, our food, our water.
You're absolutely right. It's practically impossible to completely avoid them in our modern world.
Right.
But that doesn't mean we're powerless. We can take steps to minimize our exposure, and every little bit helps.
Okay, so let's talk prevention. The research emphasizes the importance of swapping out plastic items for alternatives. What are some key changes we can make in our everyday lives?
The kitchen is a great place to start. Think about all the plastic we use there. Ditch those plastic cutting boards and Tupperware containers and opt for wood glass or stainless steel. And say goodbye to those plastic tea bags and coffee pods. Loose leaf tea and a French press are much better alternatives.
What about those single-use plastic water bottles? I know I'm guilty of grabbing those on the go. What can we do about that?
It's easy to fall into that trap, but carrying a reusable water bottle is such a simple change that can make a big difference.
For sure.
And while we're on the topic of swaps, consider switching from polyester underwear to cotton.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised how much microplastic sheds from synthetic fabric.
Wow, I never thought about that. And what about all the plastic-wrapped products at the grocery store? Is there any way to avoid that?
It's definitely a challenge. Try to choose items with minimal packaging or opt for bulk options when possible. And here's a tip. Unbleached toilet paper is not only better for the environment, but also less likely to contain microplastics.
So it's about making conscious choices in all areas of our lives.
Exactly. It's not about being perfect, but rather about being mindful of our choices and doing what we can to reduce our microplastic footprint.
This is all great information, but I have to admit I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. Where do we even begin?
It's understandable to feel that way. Remember, you don't have to do everything at once.
Right.
Start small. Choose 1 or 2 swaps that feel manageable for you and go from there.
Okay.
Every little change adds up.
Okay, that's reassuring. So instead of getting paralyzed by the enormity of the problem, we can focus on making small, achievable changes.
Exactly. And remember, this is an ongoing conversation.
Right.
The research on microplastics is constantly evolving, so stay curious and keep learning.
Right.
The more informed we are, the better equipped we'll be to make healthy choices for ourselves and our planet.
Great point. So what does all this mean for you, dear listener?
Yeah.
It means you have more power than you think. You can take action to minimize microplastic buildup in your body.
Exactly. By combining removal methods like plasma donation with proactive steps to reduce your exposure, you can make a real difference.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, but I want to leave you with a challenge. What's one small change you can make today to reduce your exposure to microplastics? Maybe swap out that plastic water bottle for a reusable one, or ditch those coffee pods for a French press.
Remember, every little bit counts. Your health and the health of our planet are worth it. So stay informed, stay curious, and keep diving deeper.
That wraps up part 1 of our microplastic deep dive. Be sure to tune in for part 2, where we'll delve even deeper into this fascinating and important topic.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of microplastics. Before we move on, I want to circle back to something we discussed earlier, the fact that our bodies lack a natural way to eliminate these microplastics.
Right.
It really highlights the importance of minimizing our exposure in the first place.
Absolutely. And I'm still amazed by how something as simple as switching to a bamboo toothbrush or using a reusable shopping bag can actually make a positive impact. It feels empowering to know that we can take action.
Those everyday choices really do add up. And speaking of choices, let's shift our focus to food. Microplastics have unfortunately infiltrated our food supply, but there are steps we can take to reduce our intake.
Spill the tea, literally. Are we talking about those plastic tea bags again?
Those are definitely a culprit. Choosing loose leaf tea is a much better option, but it goes beyond tea.
Okay.
Think about the packaging your food comes in. Whenever possible, opt for fresh produce over prepackaged items, and choose glass jars or metal tins over plastic containers.
I've also heard that seafood can be a significant source of microplastics. Is there any truth to that?
Unfortunately, yes. Fish and shellfish can ingest microplastics present in the water, which can then end up on our plates.
So what's a seafood lover to do? Do we have to give it up entirely?
You don't necessarily have to give up seafood altogether,
Okay.
but it's wise to be mindful of the types of seafood you choose. Smaller fish, like sardines and anchovies, tend to have lower levels of microplastics compared to larger predatory fish.
Interesting. So it's not just about reducing plastic in our own lives. It's also about supporting sustainable fishing practices that help protect our oceans and the creatures that live in them.
Precisely. It's all interconnected. The choices we make as consumers have a ripple effect on the environment, which ultimately impacts our own health.
This whole conversation has been eye-opening. It's overwhelming to realize just how widespread microplastics are in our world.
It is a sobering reality, but the good news is that awareness is growing, and with awareness comes the power to make positive changes.
Right. Knowledge is power. And speaking of knowledge, I'm curious about something. We've discussed ways to remove microplastics from our bodies and how to minimize our exposure. But is there any research on how they might be affecting our health once they're inside us?
That's a great question. In an area of active research, scientists are still working to understand the full extent of microplastics' impact on human health. However, there are some early findings that are raising concerns.
Good job.
For example, some studies have shown that microplastics can disrupt hormone function. This disruption has potential implications for fertility, metabolism, and even brain development.
Wow, that's concerning. What else are researchers finding?
There's also evidence suggesting that microplastics can trigger inflammation in the body, which is linked to various chronic diseases.
So it's not just about removing these microplastics from our systems. It's also about potentially preventing health problems down the road.
Exactly. The more we learn about microplastics, the more urgent it becomes to take action both individually and collectively.
It almost feels like we're living in a science fiction movie, except it's our reality.
There are definitely some parallels. But unlike in a movie, we don't have to wait for a superhero to save us. We can all be part of the solution.
You know, we talked earlier about the glymphatic system, the brain's cleaning crew. It made me wonder if our bodies have other natural defense mechanisms against microplastics.
That's a fascinating question. Our bodies are remarkably resilient and have various ways to protect themselves from harmful substances.
Like our immune system.
Exactly. Our immune system is constantly working to identify and eliminate foreign invaders, and that includes microplastics.
Okay.
However, it's not a foolproof system, especially when we're constantly bombarded with these particles from multiple sources.
Right. It's like we're asking our immune system to fight a never-ending battle.
That's a good analogy. That's why it's so important to support our immune system in every way we can, eating a healthy diet, getting enough sleep, managing stress levels, and of course, reducing our exposure to microplastics.
It all circles back to those lifestyle choices we were discussing earlier. This conversation is really highlighting the interconnectedness between our personal health and the health of our planet.
Absolutely. We're all part of a larger ecosystem. The choices we make individually have a collective impact. What we do to the planet, we ultimately do to ourselves.
I think one of the most impactful things we can do is spread awareness about this issue. The more people who understand the problem of microplastics, the more we can work together towards solutions.
I completely agree. Education is key. We need to share this information with our friends, families, and communities. We can also support organizations that are actively working to reduce plastic pollution and advocate for policies that promote sustainability.
It's not about shaming anyone or inducing fear, but rather about empowering people with knowledge so they can make informed choices.
Exactly. We can all be part of the solution one step at a time.
This deep dive has been incredibly informative. I have to admit, I'm still feeling a bit overwhelmed by the scope of the problem. It can feel daunting.
It's understandable to feel that way. But remember, you don't have to solve the entire problem on your own. Focus on what you can control. Make small changes in your own life, spread awareness, and support initiatives that are working towards a more sustainable future.
Okay, that feels more manageable, one step at a time.
That's the spirit.
Well,
And remember, progress over perfection.
great advice. This deep dive has been truly eye-opening. We've explored the science of how microplastics enter our bodies, the potential methods for removal, and the crucial steps we can take to minimize our exposure.
We've also discussed the potential health impacts of microplastics and the importance of supporting our immune systems and making sustainable choices.
It's a complex issue, but I think we've provided a solid foundation for understanding the problem and empowering our listeners to take action.
I agree. We've equipped our listeners with knowledge, and now it's up to them to decide what steps they want to take on their own journey.
And remember, every little bit counts. Even small changes can have a ripple effect and contribute to a larger solution. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This has been one of our most impactful deep dives yet.
It really has. We've uncovered a lot of information, but there's still so much we're learning about the long-term consequences of microplastics.
It's true. We've discussed how these microplastics enter our bodies, potential ways to remove them, and the importance of minimizing our exposure. But where do we go from here? What does the bigger picture look like?
That's the question we need to be asking. And it's clear that we need systemic change to effectively address this issue. We need to look upstream at reducing plastic production at its source. We need to improve our waste management systems. And we need to invest in research and development of alternative materials.
So it's not just about individual actions, it's about holding corporations and governments accountable for their role in this plastic crisis.
Absolutely. Consumers have a role to play, but we need policies and regulations that incentivize sustainable practices and hold polluters responsible.
It's like that saying, think globally, act locally. We can make changes in our own lives while also advocating for larger-scale solutions.
Exactly. And there's exciting innovation happening in the field of material science. Scientists are developing biodegradable plastics made from plant-based materials, and there's growing interest in circular economy models where products are designed for reuse or recycling.
That does give me hope knowing that brilliant minds are working on these solutions.
There's definitely reason for optimism, but it will require a collective effort from all sectors of society, governments, businesses, researchers, and individuals to create a truly sustainable future.
You know, one thing that's really struck me throughout this deep dive is the interconnectedness of everything. Our health is deeply intertwined with the health of our planet, and our choices, no matter how small they seem, have ripple effects that extend far beyond ourselves.
It's a powerful reminder that we're all part of a delicate ecosystem. What we do to the planet, we ultimately do to ourselves.
This deep dive has given us a lot to think about. It's a call to action, to be more mindful of our choices, to advocate for change, and to support innovation.
It's also a call to remain curious and continue learning. The more we understand about this issue, the better equipped we'll be to navigate it.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. To our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of microplastics. We hope you found it informative, thought-provoking, and maybe even inspiring.
Remember, even seemingly small actions can contribute to a larger solution. Stay informed, stay curious, and keep diving deeper into the issues that matter to you.
And until next time, stay healthy and stay engaged. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a fascinating topic shaping our world.